welcome to Gettin Legal With It, a podcast for Colorado young lawyers by Colorado young lawyers. I'm your host, Kevin Chaney. For those listening to us for the first time, I'm a personal injury and criminal defense lawyer here in Colorado. I graduated from the University of Colorado Law School in 2014 and founded my practice, Chaney, Galuzzi & Howard, LLC, a short time later. I'm a member of the Colorado Trial Lawyers Association, where I serve on its board, executive committee, and legislative committee. I also serve on the Colorado Bar Association's Board of Governors, the CBA Executive Committee, and the CBA Young Lawyers Division Executive Council. Finally, I'm also a member of the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar Association. If you're interested in learning more about any of these wonderful organizations, please feel free to shoot me an email at kevin@cghlawfirm.com. This podcast is created and sponsored by the Colorado Bar Association's Young Lawyers Division. Our goal with this podcast is to bring you bi-weekly episodes with information that is both fun and informative for young lawyers. We have some awesome guests lined up, and we are just getting started. I'd also like to give a special shout out to Rick at Lions Bridge Recording. If you like our podcast, please leave us a review and tell your colleagues. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Chris Brock, who is one of my good friends from law school. How are you doing today, Chris?
Doing well, Kevin. How you doing?
I am doing all right. You know, it's a nice sunny summer day out here. So Chris is the managing attorney of Probate Power, which is the CCDC's probate and estate planning and legal program. And prior to joining CCDC, Chris worked as a law clerk for the Honorable A. Bruce Jones in the Denver District Court and as a Dean's Fellow at the University of Colorado Law School. He's admitted to the Colorado Bar and is a member of the Colorado and Denver Bar Associations, where he belongs to the Trust and Estate and Elder Law sections. Chris focuses his practice in the areas of special needs planning, estate planning, and probate administration. Chris graduated from the University of Colorado Law School in 2014. He clerked for several organizations during law school, including the Civil Litigation and Employment Law section of the Attorney General's Office and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and American Studies from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Chris, why don't you just kind of give the listeners a little bit of background? Where are you from?
I am from a tiny town in southwest Ohio called Camden. So if your listeners hear a little twang in my voice, that's where that came from.
That's that Camden twang right there?
Yeah, the Camden, about an hour north of Cincinnati. And the closer you get to Cincinnati, the more the twang comes in. The more you get closer to the Ohio River there in Kentucky, yeah.
Okay. And then just from your bio, I saw you went to the Miami University in Ohio, and you got the Political Science American Studies double major. I also have the Political Science and American Studies double major. Were you already thinking law school, I guess, when you got that?
I was thinking law school.
Same here.
I've been thinking law school since about high school, I would say. I didn't know what I wanted to do in terms of what area of practice, but since, I don't know, 15, 16 years old, the thought of being a lawyer was right there, number one on my list. And I thought political science, American studies, like learning about our history and politics and stuff, kind of the best platform to jump off of into law school.
And you know, we're so similar in that. I also kind of decided I wanted to be a lawyer at a really young age. And then once you get a poli-sci American Studies double major, that's pretty much your only option, because there's not a lot of great careers looking to hire a Bachelor of Political Science or American Studies out there.
That's very true. After I graduated, I worked for the Obama campaign for a year.
Okay.
And that was great, but you're not going to make a living being a campaigner walking the streets. So after about a year of that, I'm like, yep, time for law school.
And were you working for Obama out in Ohio?
I was there in Probate County in rural Ohio, trying to convince all of my buddies and friends who probably had never voted Democrat in their life that, hey, take a look at this Obama guy.
Hey, there's a lot worse states, though. At least you were in like a battleground area when they were, going after it.
That made it super fun.
Nice. So then for law school, obviously you went to the University of Colorado, go Buffs, class of 2014. Great year. I know some great people that graduated that year. What brought you to Colorado? Was it the law school? Was it Colorado itself, or kind of tell us a little bit about that journey?
Sure. So after I graduated from Miami, so I grew up about 20 minutes from Miami. Camden is just 20 minutes down the road. And after I graduated from college, I was thinking like, man, let's see another part of the country a little bit. At the time, I was really leaning towards environmental law. So that was something I was looking for in a law school program. So most of the law schools I applied to were actually out west, because I had a professor in college who actually grew up in Crescent Butte, Colorado. And he loved the West.
Yeah.
And so he was a great influence on me since Kevin Armitage. And he was a great influence. And so I thought, let's check out the West a little bit. And so I applied to several out here in the West, and I got in at CU. And so I came out and visited. And the day I visited CU Law School, I sold. It was home. I could tell right away.
Oh, dude, it's so funny how that works. I grew up in Wyoming, also a pretty rural area, and I always had this vision of me living in San Francisco. And I only had been to San Francisco one time. I'd been like 6 years old, but like that was like the dream for me, like, oh, what a cool city. And I was going to go to law school out there, and my older brother lived in Denver and was like, why don't you just come to Colorado? Just come check it out, see how it feels. And after like a couple days and like touring CU, I was like, oh yeah, this is the one. Sorry, San Francisco, that's not going to be the dream anymore.
Right.
So I know you said that you wanted to be a lawyer from when you were about 16. Was there a specific aspect that kind of drew you to the legal profession? I know you mentioned you were interested in environmental law. Was that kind of like where you started when you were 16?
The environmental law came probably when I was in college, when I realized how big of a deal climate change was.
Okay.
And environmental degradation and how all that was happening under George W. Bush at the time and stuff. And I thought that was just the one issue that if I was going to devote my life to, as a job, climate change was it. And so I was really thinking about environmental law. Before, when I was in high school, it was just being a lawyer in general. And I think the reason why it was being a lawyer in general is just a great way to help people. And there's so many avenues to being a lawyer that you can go down to help people. And environmental law was definitely one of them. It was high on my list. Obviously, I'm not doing that now. And it just ended up not happening for me, not being my path. But just being a lawyer, having that JD, there's just so many doors that open up and so many things you can do, whether working for a nonprofit like I do, working for the government, being a litigator every day of your life like you are, or doing something not involved in the law at all, but having that JD just opens those doors. And I thought this is the best way for me to do something good with my life, is getting that advanced degree, that law degree.
I'm always looking for themes and kind of patterns amongst our guests. And one of the ones that I feel like is present in most of these conversations is getting to law school with the idea of doing one area of law, but then by the time you leave law school, you end up on a different path. Was there like a moment in law school where you were like, environmental law just isn't going to be my thing? Or was that kind of like a gradual realization, or talk a little bit about kind of that mindset or that transition for you?
I think it was a more gradual transition for me. I worked for the EPA, as you mentioned, one semester, and that was really interesting. It was in like the fuels division, so regulating. I remember regulating fuels from ships and boats and things like that, and cars. It was interesting. And then one semester, I also worked for the Sierra Club, doing various different sort of things for them. And I think I realized over time, kind of two things. One was that it's honestly really difficult to get a job on the environmental group side. It seemed really tough to find, it seemed much easier to get a job, working for oil and gas or something like that. But working for an environmental group like the Sierra Club, Defenders of Wildlife, just seemed a really hard nut to crack, honestly. So that was kind of one aspect I looked at, like, wow, this is going to be really a tough job market out there. And the second was that I realized, like, while I really, really cared about the environment, doing the work day to day was not was not exactly thrilling for me.
Right.
It wasn't something that I didn't wake up in the morning and think, Chevron tests and regulations, leg reg, like the minutia of regulations and that sort of stuff. It just I found out over the course of taking these classes in law school and stuff that by the end of 3 year, I realized that that's not something I want to do every day. It's super important, and hats off to the people who do, because I great respect for them, and what they do is amazing. But I found out I don't know if I could do that day in, day out for 20 years.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you do day in and kind of day out. Where are you working these days?
Right now, I work for the Colorado CrossDisability Coalition, also called CCDC.
And I think I heard earlier that's a nonprofit. Can you tell us a little bit about CCDC? What is it? Kind of what's its mission?
Sure. CCDC is a disability rights organization, a social justice organization that started in 1990, actually, so 31 years ago now. And CCDC is, there to advocate for all types of people with disabilities, from Down syndrome to physical disabilities to autism, to the whole spectrum of disabilities. Hence the cross disability in the name. And CCDC was started by a bunch of advocates who wanted to help others in the disabled community, help with reasonable accommodations, help with job placement, Medicaid appeals, and advocating on the state level. Right now we have a big advocacy department that advocates on the state level to try to let the legislature know that, hey, they're 1/5 of Coloradoans have a disability, and this is something that you need to focus on when you're passing bills. That you have a population here that has a voice, and we want you to hear us. And so that's what mostly that's what CCDC does. We also have an ADA litigation department, and then we have my program.
And so is it mostly lawyers then? I mean, so it sounds like there's a lot of kind of like legal navigation and also some advocacy.
Actually, it is mostly advocates. So okay. Most of CCDC is advocacy, with the advocacy department and then people on the state level, and people helping with Medicaid appeals, non-attorneys. And then we have a small ADA litigation legal department that's run by Kevin Williams, and they do a lot of litigation over reasonable accommodations, suing under the ADA. And then there's my program, which is Probate Power, which does special needs planning and so forth. And that's the other legal program.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Probate Power. Has that been around long? Is that relatively a new thing, or tell us a little bit about it?
So Probate Power has been around. It'll hit its 5th year anniversary this coming September.
Oh, cool.
So Probate Power is what we call a social enterprise. So it is a legal program under the CCDC umbrella, but as a social enterprise, the whole goal of Probate Power is there's two goals for Probate Power. One is to generate revenue for the nonprofit, so that the nonprofit CCDC doesn't just have to rely on grants and donations, that there's another revenue stream there. And then the second goal of Probate Power is to provide these special needs planning services that honestly can be hard to find out there in the community.
And so when I think of probate, I think of, wills and people kind of passing away. Why is probate so important to the disabled community, and why would CCDC, obviously a revenue stream, but how does it kind of play into the mission, I guess, of CCDC?
Well, the mission of CCDC is social justice, nothing without us, without the disabled, individuals advocating for ourselves. And if you think of probate, as you said, mostly you think of people passing away, wills, trusts, things like that. But let's say you have a child with Down syndrome, and she turns 18 years old, and you pass away, and you give your inheritance to her. If that inheritance goes directly to her, she's going to most likely lose her Medicaid. She's going to lose her SSI. and all of a sudden she's lost her public benefits that she was relying on and losing all the benefits that come with that.
Okay.
So with special needs planning, what we do is we can make sure that inheritance can go into what's called a special needs trust that can kind of shelter that inheritance on her behalf, and she can still maintain public benefit eligibility, still receive all the benefits that Medicaid and Social Security have to offer.
Okay, so it's still related to, kind of people passing away, but it's really about helping plan for, disabled children or people that are dependent on that person that passes away, and in doing so in a way that still allows people to access those public benefits and kind of make the best financial situation with kind of how to set it all up. Is that kind of right?
That's right. So it's really how, if you have a family with a child with special needs, it's like, how do we plan for our future and for our daughter's future, 40 years past when we pass away? So you have special needs trust to provide those assets, to collect that inheritance. There's also guardianships, conservatorships to make sure that, my child with Down syndrome, my child with severe autism, I can be their guardian after they turn 18, and then we can name future guardians. Other people can to make decisions for them after I pass away. So I know that their person is protected and that they have assets in this trust to provide for them long into the future.
So I know that conservatorships have been in the news, especially yesterday because of Britney Spears. So probably a lot of people are learning about the fact that these things exist. What is the difference between a conservatorship and a guardianship?
So it's a little funny. In California, a conservatorship is what we call a guardianship here in Colorado.
Okay.
So every state kind of uses different vocabulary. So, but a guardianship here and a conservatorship in California basically means that somebody is in charge of an incapacitated adult and can make decisions for them. And it can be as limited to just medical decisions or unlimited and broad-based and cover everything from medical decisions, financial decisions, where the person lives, etc. And then a conservatorship here in Colorado just deals with finances. So for instance, if there's someone who, grandma has a large estate and has a bunch of money, owns a business, but then she gets dementia, what do we do about that? And that's when a conservatorship can come into place and somebody can, take over her finances and help run that business, etc.
And do you guys work exclusively with the disabled community, or if someone wants a will or an estate, is that something that Probate Power does as well? Are you guys, I guess, open to the public, if you will, or only in that kind of specific niche?
We're totally open to the public. We focus on families with disabilities and families with special needs, but I would say probably 15 to 20% of my clients over the past couple of years have been families or individuals who did not need anything extra because of a disability or special needs. They just may have had a family member or a friend or a neighbor who said, hey, we got our will done with him. He works for a disability rights nonprofit, but he can still do your will. And so I definitely do estate planning for people who don't have anyone with disabilities or special needs.
And I think because you said earlier, some of the profit from the law firm aspect of it goes back to CCDC. Is that kind of a way, I guess, people could support the CCDC, is by kind of having their estate planning and probate needs done through Probate Power?
That's how we see it. Yes. It's a great way to, not everyone is able to, write a check to CCDC every quarter or every year. But if they can find a way, if they have a need for a will, a power of attorney document, special needs trust, etc., and they want to also help CCDC at the same time, it's a great way to fulfill both of those.
What about so most of our listeners are law students or young lawyers. Is there a way for them to get involved with CCDC or assist in some way? I mean, do you guys have interns? Is there some type of volunteer program that they can kind of get involved and help the local disabled community?
Absolutely. So Probate Power, we almost always have an intern. So actually, my previous fall intern is now my now paralegal. She just graduated from law school. Her name's Hannah. And after she takes the bar, she's going to join me and be the second attorney at Probate Power.
Awesome. You guys are growing. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're growing and she's great. So I'm happy to have her on board. So another CU grad, by the way.
Hey, go Buffs.
Yeah, and so we almost always have some sort of summer intern. We have a fall intern coming up. That's a DU law student. So Probate Power always tries to have a student in there both to learn and to take some of the workload off of the attorneys, off of me. So that's always great. And CCDC itself, we are always looking for volunteers to help advocate on the state level if they want to learn about helping people stay on Medicaid, that sort of stuff. CCDC is always looking for volunteers to do those sort of things.
Is there any, I guess, tips or tricks you have for a law student that's thinking about either working in the disability realm or in kind of the probate estate planning realm? Obviously, you probably want to take some, trust in estates and some of those basic classes. But is there anything else that you kind of wish you had known in law school? Have been like, oh, hey, I would have gotten involved in this or I would have done that. Any advice kind of now 5-6 years removed?
I think definitely any sort of internship, externship, some sort of, job placement you can do at any either law firm or nonprofit that's in the field is invaluable. Or even clerking for a judge that maybe works on a probate docket, if that intrigues you. That seems to be the way to learn, like that's how when I was in law school, even though it's not exactly the same, when I worked with the Attorney General's office in the civil litigation department, it was an invaluable experience just learning how to write things and submit stuff to court and whatnot. And trying to do that in the actual field that you want to work in is really unique and valuable. And it can probably help you land a job, maybe even at that place. Like Hannah, who was working for me, in the fall. And when I hired her as a fall extern, I didn't know I was going to be hiring her in January. It was just by the mid-December, I needed the help and she was awesome. So, it was a perfect combination. So sometimes it just works out that way.
So tell us a little bit about, so you're one of the, I think the first, if or one of the only, if not the first kind of probate and estate planning lawyer we've had on the show. Tell me a little bit about the day-to-day. Do you go to court at all? Is it mostly meeting with clients? Is it a lot of writing? Kind of what's your day-to-day life like in this practice area?
That's a good question. When I wake up in the morning, first thing I do, once I start working, answer emails. That is a big thing. I don't know about you, but answering tons of emails was something I did not expect when I became a lawyer. I'm surprised by the volume of emails, like that. So that is something that young lawyers or law students really need to keep in mind, is that you need to set time. It's not just you in front of the computer typing away all day. Client communication is huge. I always try to respond to my clients within 24 hours. So that is something key. So answering a lot of emails. A typical day will be, I may be drafting a will, drafting a special needs trust, working on guardianship documents. I would say a typical day, I'll have 1 or 2 meetings with either potential clients or to talk about, me representing them, either drafting documents for them or go pursuing guardianship for their child. Or I'll meet with current clients to review documents I've already drafted for them so that they can get ready to execute them. I would say probably about once a week, I'll be in court for a guardianship hearing. I do quite a few guardianship hearings. Right now they're all over WebEx, but Before COVID, I was heading up to Adams County or downtown to Denver County and doing a guardianship hearing about once a week. So it's a mix of in front of my computer typing away, and a mix in meeting clients in person or over Zoom and being in court. It's a good mixture.
I wish I could say that answering emails is unique to your experience as a lawyer, but unfortunately for all of our young listeners out there, answering emails is pretty much part of the job description in almost every legal field. I think I was counting the other day. I think I average about 80 a day. Is how many come in. Now, thankfully, a lot of those are, just a quick read and I don't need to respond to. But yeah, I think on average, because if I don't check my email for a day, I usually have about 80 the next day. So it's definitely a large part of the job and not something they necessarily tell you in law school to, because there are a lot of tips and tricks too to managing your inbox. Basically, some people, I check it, 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. and don't try to look at it during the day. And some people kind of, go back and forth. So finding a system, I think, that works for you and help you be efficient is definitely an important skill for people to develop kind of as they advance through their careers. I had one question, and it may, I guess, kind of depend on the disability and the situation, but how involved in, so let's say you're doing a conservatorship or a guardianship or a special needs trust, how involved is the disabled person's, in that process? Are you mostly working with their parents or guardians, or, do you consult with, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking and things, or is that kind of a case-by-case basis?
I'm going to give you the lordly answer. It depends.
Spoken like a true lawyer.
It really depends on the person's, every situation is different. So often it will be parents who come to me when their child turns 18 for a guardianship. And sometimes the adult child is involved. They will come to the meeting if everyone agrees that guardianship is the way they want to go and it is needed, it is necessary. Then often I will meet with the parents and often they will bring the adult child along. I almost always try to meet with the adult child just to gauge, their ability to understand and whatnot. It's good to always see the adult child who's the subject of guardianship while that's happening. In terms of special needs planning, there are a few different types of special needs trusts. Some of them is for future estate planning, like parents want to set up a special needs trust for their child in the future. Mm-hmm. But there's also what's called a first party special needs trust or a disability trust where somebody with a disability or special needs, it's their own money going into it. For instance, if they had a personal injury settlement, they had a personal injury settlement after suing Starbucks or something like that, mm-hmm. or the city of Denver, and they received $100,000, then they can't just put that into a bank account because they're going to lose their Medicaid. They're going to lose their Social Security. So then they will come to me personally and say, I have $100,000 from this personal injury settlement. What can I do with it to keep on my Medicaid? And so then we put it into that disability trust. And so there's quite a bit of interaction with the person with special needs disability in those situations. But every case just depends on the facts of the case.
I guess since the Britney Spears has been in the news, if there's a situation where a disabled person objects to the guardianship or the conservatorship, do they get court-appointed counsel, or how does that work? If they're saying, I want to be independent, or I want, maybe I'm okay with some of it, but I don't want to go that far. Obviously, I'm assuming they have a right to object and kind of be heard, but do they get counsel, or how does that kind of work?
Yes, they get counsel. So there's a lot of due process involved in a guardianship or conservatorship case. So one thing that happens right when a guardianship petition is filed in a court, the first thing the court will do is appoint a court visitor. And that court visitor is an independent third party, usually an attorney appointed by the judge to interview the parties, the parents, the respondent, the person that is the subject of the potential guardianship. And if you look at a court visitor report, one of the very first questions on there will say, does respondent want court appointed counsel? And as soon as they say yes, or if they say yes, then they get court appointed counsel. Sometimes they will want court appointed counsel, not because they oppose the guardianship or conservatorship, but they feel like they just want representation, just to be safe, But they absolutely get the right to counsel if they want it. They get the right to speak at a hearing, to offer testimony, all the stuff you would think in terms of like a trial. The person that is potentially the subject of guardianship gets all of those, has all of those rights to stop it or try to stop it if they really don't want or don't think they need it.
Interesting. I thought that might be the case, but other than like kind of public defenders, there's a lot of areas of law where you think attorneys would be appointed as kind of a due process right, and they are not. Evictions and different things like that. So it's good to hear that, individuals, especially given everything that's going on in the news, that individuals do have the right to kind of contest that and have some court-appointed counsel to say, hey, maybe this is going too far, or maybe it's going too long, or things like that.
Right.
Before we move on to our final topic of the day, I always like to ask people this. What is your favorite thing? What do you enjoy the most about either your job or your practice area? What do you find the most rewarding? Something like that.
I think it's the people that, the clients that I work with. When a client leaves my office, more often than not, they're happy. I did something good for them that they've been needing or wanting to do for a long time. I can't tell you how many times I've had a client come to me for a will or guardianship or whatever, and they say, I've been meaning to do this for so long, and I finally came around to it, and then we finally get the guardianship or get their estate plan all set up, and they're just happy that they have that security in place, and they can leave my office, that they know that if something happens to them or to their child or whatever, that things are in place moving forward. And so I think just working with them, making people's lives just a little more better and giving them peace of mind is probably my favorite thing about what I do.
That's great, man. It's always super rewarding to be able to help individuals, and given the area of law that you're in, I can imagine how that really must be rewarding to see the impact that you have on people's lives, and to give people security and know that their loved one is going to be taken care of kind of after they're gone. I usually sometimes get that experience with personal injury clients. With criminal defense clients, they don't always leave the office happy when you break the bad news. I'm like, the evidence is overwhelming and this is what's going to happen to you, and they're like, oh darn. not the fun kind of lawyer, but it's all super interesting, and I encourage our listeners to get involved. And at the end of this podcast, we'll have Chris give you some contact information. So if you are interested in being an intern or getting involved with CCDC or Probate Power, or just kind of chatting about this topic in general, we'll get you some info so you can get a hold of Chris, who's a great guy and can kind of point you in the right direction. Let's move on to our final topic today. I learned just a few hours ago from Chris that on July 26th is going to be the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And obviously this is audio only, but Chris, you are in a wheelchair, and so I know that this law and kind of this area of law is very personal to you, and something that you're passionate about. I'm assuming that most people have heard of the ADA, but most people probably have no idea what it actually does. So why don't you kind of just give us the bird's eye view of what is the ADA?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that. So just to step back, yes, I'm in a wheelchair. I'm a T6 paraplegic. So basically, I don't have the use of my legs. So I'm in a wheelchair. I have been since 18. So now that I'm getting old and I'm 36, so roughly half my life, I've been in a wheelchair. And so the ADA, man, it is the paramount civil rights law, at least for me, of the last 30 years, at least 31 years, at least in my opinion. It provides a lifeline for all peoples with disabilities in terms of access and being able to be a member of society. Before the ADA, I know people would have to call a restaurant to say, can I get in your restaurant? Do you have stairs? Can I get, can my wheelchair fit in the doorway? Things like that. Or people weren't able to get on buses. People weren't able to get on a subway. There's no curb cuts. There was kind of, it created a different world for people with disabilities that they were not seen as part of the community. And in many ways, they could not be a part of the community, because if you're in a wheelchair and there's no curb cut, you're not exactly getting on the sidewalk by yourself unless somebody's pushing you up there, or you may not be able to go to a concert because there's no handicap accessible seating.
Right.
So, over 31 years now, it's amazing that the ADA there's no question that I can go to, if my favorite musician is going to Summit Music Hall, I know I can go. Going to Red Rocks, as long as I can get tickets, I know I can go. Yeah.
Right.
I know I can go to, West End Tavern, or down here, I can go to BJ's restaurant down here in Aurora, because I know that it's accessible. So the ADA is just an amazing law, to me, on the same level as the civil rights legislation from the 1960s, in terms of just changing people's lives, and definitely has changed my life.
Wow. I think you pointed out the curb cuts, and obviously I see those every day, but, as a person who is able-bodied and has, that privilege, really, I think is the way to say that. It's something that I don't even really, you just kind of take for granted. You just kind of see the slope on the sidewalks. So does the ADA, I know it applies to private businesses, but so it also applies to like local and state governments and stuff. So the like cities and stuff that own the sidewalks are required to basically have those.
As far as I understand, yes. Okay. So I don't litigate the ADA.
Right.
But I do know that city buses need to be accessible. Red Rocks, which is owned by the city of Denver, Kevin Williams in my organization has sued city of Denver over Red Rocks, over the accessibility issues there, to make it better for people with disabilities. So yeah, this definitely applies to government agencies as well. And you're speaking of curb cuts. For my honeymoon a couple years ago, my wife and I went to Europe. So we went to Paris and Italy, and there are in a lot of places in Europe there are no curb cuts, and so a lot of times I'd have to do a wheelie to hop down to cross the street, and then often my wife would have to help me pop up on the other side of the sidewalk, or I could not get on the subway in Paris because they had very few accessible stations that I could get down to, and I don't know if I could get on the subway. I don't remember if I could actually get on the subway, but we didn't even attempt it because there were so few accessible stations. So it's really unique to go to an older place like Europe and see how the U.S. used to be, and then coming back to the U.S. and you say, oh, actually things are pretty good here, because of the ADA.
Wow. Yeah, and you think about that, it's not. You would expect a country, that maybe is poorer or not as developed, maybe to have some access issues. But you would think that, a lot of wealthier nations like France or Italy would have that. And, again, that's, I think, kind of my privilege showing just to kind of make that assumption. But, so it really does, I think, speak to the benefits of the ADA and how it really just changed, daily life for, disabled people. So is that something, I guess, now, you don't necessarily always or call ahead or something to restaurants just because of the ADA, you assume there's going to be at least some accommodation or some ability for you to kind of access these places?
Definitely. That's something that doesn't even cross my mind when my wife and I are like, let's try a new restaurant, downtown, or this little hole in the wall that we've heard about for years. Let's finally check that out. It's not even a thought that I won't be able to get in there. Occasionally you do run into it. There are places that are just in a basement or something like this, or there are restrictions in the ADA about if the building's old enough and they haven't been renovated and stuff, they don't have to be, accessible. There are little things like that, but by and large, I find that I can really get in almost anywhere I want to or I need to, and this is pretty nice.
That's awesome, man. And so it was 31 years ago. I was trying to think, was that H.W. Bush's administration?
It was, yes.
Because I remember the ADA for civil rights legislation was actually, pretty bipartisan, and was kind of an issue that, not to get too political, but you wouldn't necessarily think of coming out of a Republican administration. But I remember reading something maybe at his passing, that, you know, it was probably the thing he was most proudest of, or one of the things he was most proudest of in his administration?
If I remember correctly, I think Bob Dole was a major sponsor, because if you recall, he was injured in World War II or Korea. I can't remember which, but he had no use of one of his arms. And so he was a disabled individual most of his life, you know, a conservative Republican from Kansas. But he was really a big sponsor of the ADA, if I remember correctly.
Interesting. So then at the CCDC, I think we talked a little bit earlier, you guys do have an ADA kind of litigation department. And so if any of our listeners, hopefully this doesn't happen to them too often because people are following the rules and doing the right thing. But if they find themselves, or they have a friend or family member who is disabled, and they find themselves where dealing with a business or an entity or a government that is not accommodating or making reasonable accommodations for their disability, CCDC is an organization they can contact and potentially get involved in that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. They quite often that, they get calls all the time from people that were possibly discriminated against. A lot of times right now, I know Kevin Williams tells me that service dogs are a big issue that he deals with nowadays, because that's kind of a newer sort of accommodation, and the avenue, the specialties around that, what are the accommodations with a service animal. So they definitely deal with new cases all the time. Anymore, it's not the big ones of there's no ramp into this place. That a lot of those have been decided. Now it's more in the weeds a little bit.
Right.
Animals that are, while very important, it's not always as obvious as steps up to the restaurant's front door.
Right. And I'm sure part of it is just educating the business owner or the landowner. Hopefully not. I would think that most people, especially in 2021, don't want to be discriminatory, and they just may not know. Hey, that, we need to be making this accommodation. And so is part of it, I guess, just kind of reaching out to them and being like, hey, this is kind of what's going on. We don't want to have to, get involved in litigation and things, but, we need these changes to be made so that this issue kind of doesn't happen again in the future.
Honestly, that I'm not sure how they go about that. That would be definitely something
outside your practice area. It's putting you on the spot with all the litigation questions, Well, Chris, man, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was an absolute pleasure. Always good to see you. What is the best email address? So earlier, as I mentioned, if anyone is interested in disability law, special needs planning, trust and estates, probate administration, Chris is a great guy to kind of reach out to and kind of learn more about that, or any of these organizations we've discussed today. I assume email is the best way to contact you.
Email's great. It is crock@ccdconline.org, or you can look up on our website, and all my contact info is on the website, and that is ccdcprobatepower.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your summer, and especially an awesome September.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Have a good one.
Get legal with it.